I was talking into this microphone the whole time, and it was recording on my computer mic the
Oh,
last time I did this. So
I've been there too.
I'm a
I've been there
pro. I
too.
just want you to know, professional. This guy right here. Welcome to Fueled by Impact, and today's episode is a fun one. I laughed more than I have on any other episode. My guest is the hilarious Brian Crall. He's the founder and general manager of Sacramento Comedy Spot. He studied improv at Upright Citizens Brigade Theater in Los Angeles. He's got 20 years of experience producing, writing, directing, and performing in sketch comedy and improv shows. I love talking with people who mix passion and career, and that is exactly what we do in this episode, among many other things. So please join me in welcoming the one, the only, the very funny Brian Crall.
We all do the same thing when it comes to technology, so I get it.
All right. Well, Brian, thank you so much for being here. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So I have already introduced you, but that being said, I like to give people an opportunity to tell the audience a little bit about themselves.
Yeah. All right. Well, geez.
No pressure.
Oh, man. Yeah, no pressure.
That's the hardest question to answer, isn't it?
Well, I mean, I got into all this on a whim. I was coming out of college. For a long time, I was a business major in college. In fact, I was like 3 years into a business degree and did not like it and decided I needed to do something else. So I lied to my parents and would drive to yeah. Well, they told me I could stay at their house rent free as long as I was in school. So what I would do is I would get up I dropped out of college. I would get up in the morning and I would drive to school still. And I would stay in the parking lot all day and read books. And I read books on Charlie Chaplin and the Titanic and lunar missions to the Mars, lunar missions from NASA. And then I was like, well, what do I want to do? I was like, I want to be in theater. So I switched to a theater degree. And then at the end of that, when I was trying to figure out what life was going to be after college, I had a friend of mine that says, you should do sketch comedy like Saturday Night Live. And we had been drinking for a while, and I was like, that sounds great. That's the next step. So I started a sketch comedy group, and then I've been doing it ever since. So
wow. That's wild. So when did your parents actually finally find out the truth?
Yeah, so after the semester off, what they didn't know about, I went to my mom and I said, listen, I dropped out of school, but I want you to know I'm back in school. So I've only been out of school for a semester, and I'm going to be a theater major. And my mom says, oh, Brian, I just wanted you to be successful. And I was like, oh, that's rough. And then my stepdad pulled me aside, and this was a little bit after this, and he said, I always wanted to be a football color commentator. Instead, I've worked for the state all my life. He goes, you do whatever you want to do, and your mom and I will always have your back. And I was like, oh, okay, well, here we go. So that kind of started the whole journey.
Wow, 1 out of 2 ain't bad.
Yeah, I'll take it. And my mom is my biggest fan now. So it all came together.
Yeah,
she loves being around the Comedy Spot. She brings all her friends to shows, and she loves all the guests that we bring on and everything. So she's 100% behind it.
That's amazing. Well, hey, now you can relate, I'm sure. What's your take? You got kids, right? How old are your kids?
So 19, 16, and 14.
Okay. And so what's your, how have you approached that type of subject with them?
So my oldest graduated during COVID, and she got a scholarship to go to a school in New York City. And she said, I'm going to be a theater major.
You said, no, business. Business would be a much better choice.
Yeah. I was like, are you sure about that? So, long story short, she didn't end up going to New York because of COVID. So she stayed home. So she's still local and she's taking theater classes. And part of me is just like, if I steer her away or if I steer the kids away from anything, that's the direction they're going to swim in. So like, I just
For
need to
sure.
kind of let them discover it on their own.
Yeah.
And they're all smart kids. They're smart. They're grounded. They're very responsible. So I figure like, unless they get into some really big trouble, I should just kind of step aside and let them figure out their own path.
Yeah. Yeah. Good
Yeah.
for you. Not always
Yeah.
easy, but
Not easy, man.
yeah.
Not easy. Because, like, I've had a good time doing what I do, but it's not like I've made a lot of money off of it. And it's not like, it's very difficult. Especially this last year has not been fun. So I know what it's like to be doing something creative that may not pay off in the end. And, of course, you want your kids to have it easier than you. But, they're in school. Like I was the first person to go to college. And it's just a natural path for all my kids. So, you figure you're doing something right. They'll figure it out in the end.
Yeah. Yeah. I totally agree.
Yeah.
But so it's a really interesting, even that balance of, pursuing something creative, but then, often that's not the most stable path forward for people.
No.
So often, it's understatement of the century. But
Yeah, it's not easy.
I'm
Yeah.
curious though, like, so talk to me a little bit about that. It's kind of an ongoing decision, right? Because I mean, it's not like you make that decision once and you're locked in forever. I mean, you all along the way have these points that you're questioning it, you could go a different direction. So clearly that's something that you've kind of still recommitted to, and you see the pros and cons of it. How do you think about that, and just bring it to life for me a little bit with respect to all the other people out there who are trying to grapple with that question of, should I pursue my creative passion full time? Should I do it on the side?
Yeah.
Should I, treat it more as a hobby and have a stable job? What does that look like?
Yeah, it's really funny that you bring this up, because there are several times, during the course of creating the Comedy Spot and keeping it going, where I had to make a decision whether or not I was going to stick to it. And the first big one, I had already opened the Comedy Spot, but it wasn't making any money. It was mostly me taking my day job money and putting it into the Comedy Spot to keep it rolling, I was a sky cap at the airport. I just checked in bags, and this is what I did during the day so I could do the stuff at night.
Yeah.
But I made a good, decent living out there. It was all tip money. Well, it's another story. But anyway, I would pay to keep the Comedy Spot open, and Southwest Airlines had offered me a supervisor's position. And that's early on in my early 20s. I was like 20, 24, something like that. And they were saying like, here's this manager's position. And I was just about ready to have kids and everything. And I had to decide, like, the decision was, if I took the Southwest job, they would have me work on Fridays and Saturdays at night.
Oh.
So that's it. There's no comedy,
Wow.
if it's not. And so I had to decide, am I going to do this or am I going to do this? And I chose the Comedy Spot. And then like several times, like we had moved to a bigger location. It was very expensive. We were losing money. And I had to I remember talking and saying like, either I'm going to do this all the way or I'm going to quit. But it's got to be all or nothing. I'm going to put all my eggs in this basket, or I'm going to quit and go get a job that's more stable. And again, I was like, well, it's time to go to the mattresses. We're going to do whatever we need to do to make this work. And then the same thing happened with COVID. It was like, am I going to stay here and keep on doing this? Because, we weren't open for a year. Or am I going to go and at this point, I'm 16 years into the Comedy Spot. I'm 21 years into doing comedy. Just with the Comedy Spot and all the experiences I've had, I can find a job someplace else making way more money than what I'm making at the Comedy Spot. But I had to choose, am I going to keep this thing going? And ultimately, I didn't want COVID to be the thing that killed the business. So I had to, once again, I had to make the commitment. It was all or nothing. I have to make this work. I'm going to make this work. I'm going to work harder than I ever have to make this thing work. And then if I leave the Comedy Spot, because now it's a nonprofit and there's a board of directors and there are people here that can pick up the leadership positions and keep the thing going. Um, I I would rather leave when I'm at the pinnacle of things than at the worst time when we weren't open, when we couldn't do any business. So I got us through COVID. We have another year of who knows? Like the next year is just it's not gonna be business as usual.
No, it's
so
not.
so we're gonna weather that for another year, and I think we're gonna come out of it in a really good place. But you're right. You have to decide, and ultimately, the decision for me came down to I'm not done yet. I haven't gotten us to where I want it to be, and when I'm there, then I can it's not a big decision, because I have people that can take over and continue on. And that was the most important thing for me, is that I left something behind that might endure past when I'm, ready to move on. When I die, maybe I'll be, 80 years old and still trying to get on stage and do fart jokes, Like, I don't know, dude. So
I'd like
we'll
to
have
see that.
Yeah.
That's really great. And it almost feels to me like that, like those are tests along the way. It's like tests that the universe throws at you. And it's like, almost like you think that once you get through a test like that, like, all right, that's it. Like, but there's no smooth sailing, right? Like it's never hit a point where you can be like, all right, I can relax now. There's nothing coming out from around the corner to get me.
Yeah. No, even with COVID, everyone got vaccines, and we started to open back up, and, everyone's walking around like, I got the shield on and everything's fine, and we're going to start doing shows again, and then they're like, oh, you can still get sick with your vaccine. We're like, okay, so we're doing masks and vaccine cards at the gate, and okay, I see, this isn't going to be easy at all. And I thought it was going to take us, like, it was going to be a gradual ramp up over the next year where we would eventually get back to where we were.
Yeah.
And what happened was everybody came out the first month, and this was like, we're back. And then as things started to spike again and Delta variant became prevalent, everybody was like, oh, we're going to just wait. We'll be back in a couple months. So now we're like at half of where we were when we first opened. So, but it's still going to be this gradual process over the next year.
Yeah.
But yeah, it never stops. Once you think you've solved one problem, something else pops up. And I think the hardest part is, like, as I get older, it's hard to recover after you've just gotten over some really big obstacle. And then the next obstacle comes, and you're looking at it and you're like, can I continue to jump over the obstacles?
Yeah, right.
And that's tough. That's really tough. And sometimes you got to dig real deep and be like, yes, it'll be fine. We'll get through this. But the thing that has been really cool for me is, like, I've gotten better at kind of predicting what's going to happen in the future. So I've put in guardrails to make sure that it doesn't affect us as much as it used to in the past. So a good example of that is right before COVID, I was telling everybody that I really thought the economy was going to tank in 2020. So I said, we've got to put some extra money behind, so we have a couple months where if something does go wrong, we can kind of absorb it and we can keep moving on. Well, if we didn't have that extra money in the bank, we would have closed after 2 months, So, so it's just like always kind of putting those things in place and having a team that was like able to write grants for us. And so we got a bunch of grants, and our insurance guy was a friend, and he insisted that we get event insurance, and that paid off. And so it's just this collection of, like, as you keep doing this, you realize I've got to find people who are invested like I am. I don't think everybody's fully invested in your dream, right? But people that are at least fully invested at the point in their life, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then you find the best people to help you out, so that when things go wrong, it's not gonna all go away. That was the main concern, that something down the road was gonna get us.
Yeah. And did you, the nonprofit status, did that come about during the COVID stuff, or have you guys been a nonprofit for a while?
That was 2005. So
okay.
In 2005, we created the nonprofit, and we just donated everything we had built to that point over to the nonprofit. So I own nothing, is what I'm saying. I own nothing. in this business. I could get fired tomorrow, and it would be like, all right, well, take my dream and do whatever you want with it. But I also knew that I had limited means, and that if the comedy spot ever got into a difficult time, I didn't think I could personally bail us out. I didn't think that the comedy spot could grow with just, I couldn't make big bets because that big bet might affect my family forever, So
Yeah.
it had always been a community thing anyway, but it was nice to finally just go like, listen, I don't own this. We all own this. If we want to see this keep going, we need to all jump in and make this thing happen. And it's just because this is very simple. This is not a business that people would want to buy into. No one's going to be like, oh, I have to work 60 hours a week and not make a lot of money. And it's a product that nobody wants, and you have to convince them that they want it. Because we're not a traditional comedy club. So I can't just say like, oh yeah, we do stand-up, and so, who's a big headlining comedian, is coming into the club, and you're going to buy tickets. It's going to be a great time. Instead, I'm like, Greg is performing in a show called Anti-Cooperation League that you've never heard of, but he's funny, and you're going to have a great time, and you're going to walk out of here and want to come back. But I have to convince everybody along the way that that's what's going to happen. And so it's nobody wants to buy into a business where nobody wants the product. You know what I'm saying? So like,
I see you learned a lot in that business degree you didn't get.
I know. I know that I should have done something that people recognize as business. Like there's stores, you buy stuff, like there's comedy, you consume it. But with us, we're like, yeah, we're going to do this style of comedy that nobody knows about, and we're going to try and keep it going. And what's funny, not funny, what's ironic and tragic, I should probably say, is that a lot of these types of businesses have failed in the last 18 months. And I think it was just because, again, like I knew that this wasn't something that I could prop up on my own. We became a nonprofit. We ended up having donors. Without those donors, we would have never have made it through COVID. Never have made it through COVID. Wow. And so it's just, I knew that I never predicted COVID. But
I get my stock tips from you. 2005, this guy's calling the shots.
I never knew that. I never knew it would be a year of being closed. But I knew that, for sure, I was not the person to be able to keep this thing propped up for any length of time, that it would take a community. And it turns out I was right. We saved it because we pivoted at a time where we needed to pivot.
Wow, that's cool. That's a really incredible story. And you talked about like while you were hitting these obstacles along the way and having to like hunker down and say, all right, do I want to keep this going? And part of what got you through was this, it's bigger than me. It's something that you want to have leave on. How about also, I'm just curious, I know you could perform elsewhere. You could do what you do comedy wise in other ways, but how much does having this actually afford you like a creative freedom or other things? Like, is there also an angle for you that's like the art form is something really important to you, and that if you let it go along the way that you might not have been able to nurture that part of yourself the way that you would have?
Oh yeah, man, like 100%. Like, I think this is true for a lot of people. You set off on a path and you're like, this is my path. But then along the way, like these little miracles happen that push you in a direction that's way better than the path that you were on. And so like coming out of college, I wanted to go down to LA. When I first started doing comedy, I was like, oh yeah, I'll put together a sketch show and then I'll move down to LA and I'll do that. But then I had a kid and it was like, wait, I don't want to go to LA and raise a kid in LA. Like that's hard. It's even harder than raising a kid in Sacramento. So, I ended up staying here. So that was like a little miracle that, worked out great for me, because even though I wasn't in LA, I would go to LA and do all this research. And I started something that I think is is a great combination of all the things I saw down in LA.
Yeah.
And then grew that. And then because of this place, I've been able to do, voiceovers for commercials. I've been in a movie. I've been asked to interview celebrities and been given, paid work in New York and LA to fly out there and interview people at junkets for movies. I've met really cool people because of those connections. I ended up meeting Marcus Allen, who's a local, was a local news guy on the morning television station, and he's given me a lot of opportunities to work with other people in town and connected me with people. And I would have never have done that if it wasn't for the Comedy Spot. So, leaving here, I would have maybe made more money. I would have maybe been more secure, but I've been able to create all these really cool things because I just kept stumbling into one thing after another.
Yeah.
And I think, and a lot of people say, well, it wasn't stumbling. It's like, well, part of it's stumbling and part of it is being a good person and wanting to be somebody that people want to work with. And so they invite you to do cool projects, and then you'll learn something brand new you never knew before. So I was a guest host on a TV show for 100 episodes, and it was just by being a nice person and doing improv for a long time. So having a quick wit so that I could jump in the middle of a show and say something fun, and people kept inviting me back. So, I think if I would have chose the more secure, the more safer route, financially, I'd probably be in a much better place. But I get to do all these creative things and do all these weird things with amazing people. And put all that aside, I have met thousands of people at this point that have come through the Comedy Spot, hundreds of people who have taken classes, who have come up to me afterwards and said, thank you for doing this. I did something risky I never thought I could do. I feel better about myself. I feel better when I go to work. This is a great release for me. And this has been surgeons and doctors and all kinds of people that have said that. So I feel good about what I've contributed. And I'm still young, so I still have a lot of time to be able to do a lot of fun things. And that's why I've been getting into, doing some screenwriting and things like that.
Yeah. Well, that is so much of what you just said there, hits close to home for me. I mean, I don't know anybody who looks back and is like, oh man, I'm glad I made more money. But I know plenty of people who are like, I wish I had, done this experience or followed this. So I think whatever it was inside you that knew to make that decision, there was a deeper kind of wisdom there, which is awesome. So, the screenwriting, so that a relatively new thing for you?
Yeah. So a couple of years ago, I decided that I was going to set up these goals and then try to accomplish them in less time than it took to put people on the moon. And so I'm really into space. And so the goals were to write 4 screenplays, to sell one of those screenplays, to buy an investment property, to get interviewed by Terry Gross on NPR.
Well, you're getting specific now.
Yeah.
And to go to the moon.
And go to the moon. I mean, just simple things like that. I'm the Forrest Gump of 2021. So, but one of it was just some of it's just really simple, live healthy, and that's been really difficult during COVID. But yeah, and then I want to see rockets launch, and so part of the goals was just to see the upcoming SLS, which is going to be the biggest rocket NASA's ever created, and hopefully see a SpaceX rocket, which is going to be the biggest rocket ever made with their new Starship. So those were all the goals. That's why I got into it. So I finished my first screenplay. right at the beginning of 2020. I had this stage reading in 2020, submitted it for a contest and did pretty well, quarterfinalist. And now I started during COVID to write the second one, and it didn't work. And I tried to write a third one, and it didn't work. And I've just been bouncing around between ideas. But now I'm writing a screenplay about roller skating, because that's another one of my passions. And so
I could tell, actually. It's like, this guy looks like a roller skater.
I've never been diagnosed with ADHD, but from what I hear, I have a lot of like passions, so a lot of little hobbies, and roller skating is one of those, weirdly. So
that's good. Yeah, so that's really cool, and I love people who have like multiple passions and multiple interests, and just the fact that you're doing that now and getting into something that's like a little bit different, which is still, I'm sure, like you're bringing in the past. Clearly, I'm assuming you're writing comedy as well. Although
right?
Maybe you're going a hard left.
No dramas for Brian.
No drama.
Well,
someday.
Someday, yeah. So, what's really funny is the first one I wrote was an animated story called Lost Luggage, and it's when I worked for the airport, I always loved watching kids see their bags be put on the bag belt and then roll off, into wherever. Nobody knows what happens once you go through those little rubber curtains, right?
Yep.
So that's the screenplay that I wrote, is this adventure that bags go on once they get checked in, and what happens, and they go on a hero's quest. And it's all fun. Yeah, it's all fun and games, and it's comedy for sure. And then this latest one is called Keep Rollin', and it's about a guy that gets his business shut down during COVID. And
where'd you get the idea?
Yeah, right. And it's his dad that owns the business, but he gets sick, and so he has to kind of weather the storm on his own at this skating rink until he's ready to reopen, and ends up becoming a really good roller skater during that time.
Wow,
so,
nice.
Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you, if improv comedy doesn't take off for you financially, roller skating rink might be your next business venture. I hear those are on the rise.
Yeah, I like to take businesses that have no chance of surviving whatsoever and then invest my entire life into it, so that I feel that. I feel it. In fact, I told somebody, if I ever won a bunch of money or something like that, I'd probably buy a roller skating rink. And they were like, why? Why? It's like, okay, I get it.
Totally. I know. And I get the young kids, and it's funny. I think about all the businesses that were around when I was growing up, like roller skating. I mean, we used to go roller skating every week pretty much as a family. And, now it's like bounce houses and trampoline places and ninja gyms and stuff like that. But it's amazing how different the landscape has shifted. So.
Oh yeah, it's totally different. I mean, we go roller skating. My daughter likes to roller skate. And we go now, and there's just hardly anybody there, and you're just you kind of got the place to yourself. But that thing was important to me. I mean, I would go by myself. Me and my friend Josh would go roller skating every Friday night. We would talk to girls there. We had our first girlfriends there, our first kisses. Those were formidable years going and we roller skated, by the way. We actually got on the rink, but yeah, it was like I don't know if there's those places for kids anymore too. It seems like my son really likes to play games online, but is that the same as being in a place with somebody and having these experiences? I don't know. It seems
it's pretty different. Yeah,
seems foreign to me sometimes. You know?
Yeah, totally agree. Wow. That's cool. I hope the screenplay comes out. You don't have to throw it in the trash.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've already ditched one, and it was because I was starting to write it, and I was like, this is my best idea ever. And then my friend sent me a clip from a Variety magazine or something along those lines, and it was a story about a television show that was coming onto the CW, and it was basically this idea I had been writing the screenplay about.
Ouch.
And I was like, okay, I guess I'm done with that idea. So
a little too late.
Yeah, 25 pages in, I might as well just scrap the whole thing. So
Yeah.
that's okay. But that's that's how it is. And I the more I write, the more I enjoy it. And just like anything else, I'm definitely gonna fail at this a lot more than I'm gonna be successful before I start getting better at it. Just doing stage stuff for years, you have to be okay with failing. You have to be okay with just putting in your best work. It sucks, and then you learn from it, and then you do better next time.
Yeah, I can imagine. So these classes that you do, and these people that are coming out as changed people. Talk to me a little bit about that. Like what, who joins? Why do they join? What do they learn? Uh-oh.
I just laugh because it's like, again, it's like a product that nobody really knows what they're getting into, right?
Oh,
so it's
so
I'm going to take an improv class, and we end up getting a really cool cross section of people. So in my current class that just ended last night, I have somebody that's a little older than me that's in the class, but I also have somebody that's in their very early 20s, and everybody in between. And everybody's doing it for different reasons. Some people want to be performers at the Comedy Spot, like they've seen a show and they're like, I really want to do what they're doing, so I have to take these classes to learn how to do it. But I would say the majority of people take the class because they just want to have something different to do. They've read about improv, or let's say they've seen a show on TV that has Tina Fey in it. And then they go back and they read that she has an improv background. And then people go, well, if she has an improv background, I'd like to do the same thing. So then they end up taking this class, and they're not doing it to perform. They just want a release. They want to be able to laugh. And that's what happens. I mean, it's an 8-hour class, or excuse me, an 8-session class, 2 hours each session. And we basically just laugh for 2 hours, and then you go home. And so there's no better feeling than going to a place where you laugh for 2 hours, and then you go back home, and it kind of pushes you into the next week. And you're like, I can take on anything. I feel good. I'm in a good mood. And so a lot of our performers never took classes with the intention of being a performer, but kind of found that they enjoy it and they like it, and then they stick with it and end up becoming performers, which is pretty great. And we're not a club. People equate nonprofit with, I don't know if I can say shitty, but they equate nonprofit with shitty product. And that's not what we do here. So it's not nonprofit, and we get away with having crappy shows because we're a nonprofit. We have great shows because we put in the time to get better. And we put in a lot of rehearsal time, and we've failed a bunch, so we know a bunch, so we do better each time. And so these performers, these people that take the class, may not have wanted to be performers, but they're good at it and they get better at it, and they end up being on stage. And so it's a cross-section. It's a real cross-section. And it's fun because part of the class is like, we create scenes. So there's like two distinct types of improv. Game-based, which is, again, what everybody is more familiar with. So, people talk about the show, Whose Line Is It Anyway?
Yeah.
That would be more game-based improv. But because I like a challenge, I don't do anything that people know of. I do the opposite. So I do scene-based improv, or long-form improv. And long-form improv is like watching a Saturday Night Live sketch, but instead of having costumes and the ability to write and rewrite it, we just make up those sketches right on the fly. And so that's what we teach people to do, is be able to create those sketches, be able to create a character on the fly, follow a structure, and go from beginning to end and be successful at creating those.
Does one translate pretty well into the other, or is it really different skill set?
It's eventually those two things work really well together. If you have training in one, they help the other. But I feel like people who start off with game-based improv have a harder time doing scene-based improv. But the scene-based improv people have an easier time getting into game-based improv. Yeah. And the reason is in game-based improv, it's a game, and so there's certain things you could do to get a laugh. After you've played a game enough, the things you can do to get the laugh, and it's very quick and it's very big and it's very unusual. Whereas with scene-based improv, it starts off a little bit more grounded, and over time, over the course of a 2-minute sketch or 2-minute scene, it gets more and more and more unusual. And so it's hard. I think it's harder to go from something that's very in your face and big to something a little bit more subtle that builds on itself. Yeah. But having that skill to be big is really useful later on when you're doing scene-based improv.
Okay, so how do you actually teach somebody that? Like, what? Yeah. Just nuts and bolts a little bit. What does a workshop look like? Yeah. You know, what are the skills that people are learning?
So a lot of comedians, like stand-up comedians, will be like, you can't teach somebody how to be funny, you know, and it's like, yeah, dude, I get that. Like, if you are not a funny person, you're going to have a harder time in these classes. But I'd say that most average people do just fine. So a typical class. So let's take our 101 class. We start off very easy. So each class like starts off with a warm-up where you do, what do they call it? Like an icebreaker kind of games, but more theatrical icebreaker games. And it's just to get you used to kind of being in an unusual situation. And we start you off doing characters that we kind of give you. So like, play this character on stage and just talk to this other person. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to get you to be somebody else other than yourself on stage. We want you to take on a personality that's not your own, because a lot of what we do is centered around characters. And after the first couple of classes, we teach you how to play this thing called pattern. So pattern is like the backbone of every scene that we do on stage. And it's essentially this. I'm going to have an unusual character or an unusual situation, and I'm going to start playing that character at its most grounded level. And then I'm going to keep coming back to this one focus or pattern over and over again throughout the scene. But each time I come back to it, it's going to be more and more heightened or more and more funny until the end of the scene, and it's at its highest level of unusual, and then we cut the scene and we move on to the next. So it's like, did you ever watch Saturday Night Live or any kind of sketch show? Like,
for sure, yeah.
Do you have a favorite character off? I mean, I hate to ask you this. We didn't talk about it, but like, do you have a character that you remember from Saturday Night Live?
I'm a big fan of certainly Celebrity Jeopardy, Alex Trebek.
Okay, that's great. So, like the pattern to that was that you would always have like celebrities on that would be playing their celebrity like persona. And so like I remember somebody would always play one
Sean
of the characters.
Connery.
Connery, of course. Yeah. So the pattern there was like playing Jeopardy as with celebrities playing like their stereotypes. So you would have 3 people or 3 celebrities on there, and they're all playing Jeopardy as their persona. So of course you would have to have Sean Connery, and everything would be about James Bond, or everything would be about The Rock, the movie The Rock, right? So you're playing as those characters, and it gets more and more crazy as you go along. The one that I remember just recently was when Tom Hanks played a MAGA guy on Jeopardy. It was so funny because it was a black woman that was on the panel, and it was Tom Hanks playing a MAGA guy, and they would answer questions. It ended up being that they shared the same views, and they were like, yeah, that's true. We do have kind of the same thoughts on things. And that was the pattern, is like, you thought, you know, one person was going to be extreme one way and one person was going to be extreme one way, but then they ended up sharing views on things, and it was like, oh crap, that's similar to how I feel. And so it was a really good pattern of coming back to these things that they would agree on. But then at the very end, it's something that they don't. And that's how they got to Crazy Town, and that was the end of the sketch. And so so it's always coming back to something that's funny or something that's unusual. So just boiling it down to like a character, it's like finding someone let's just play a game. We're just going to play a game, Mike. So like, give me some sort of like grounded profession, just for fun. Grounded profession.
I'm going to say luggage guy at the airport.
Okay, luggage guy at the airport. That's really ungrounded.
That's not grounded. Why is it?
Listen, and by the way, tip the guys at the curb, guys. That's how they make their money. Don't be a cheapskate. It's very important so that they can pay for their comedy theater. Okay, so guy at the curb. So you're just checking in bags. That's your job.
Yeah.
Let's give this character something unusual. And when we're talking about a character or a comedy character, they usually have one very strong focus. And instead of like being a three-dimensional person, they have one thing that's important to them. So do you have a hobby that you're secretly into that you've never shared with anybody? Or are you into something that you're like, that's kind of weird and that it's harder to like share with people?
Unicorns.
I
love unicorns.
Okay, great. So what we're going to do is we're going to layer this on top of this baggage handler, right?
Okay.
So this baggage handler would start off and say, oh, hey, welcome. I'm going to take your bags. What city are you going to? Oh, it looks like you're going to San Diego. I'll go ahead and tag your bags. You know, if unicorns were here, they would just magically transport your bag from here to San Diego. And now, a grounded person in that situation, just your everyday person, would go, what would be your response if I said your bags would be magically transported by unicorns?
Sure, buddy. Sure. That sounds great.
Great. Okay. Excellent. Yeah. Usually in those situations, so in every like comedy sketch, you have like one person that's more unusual and one person that's more grounded. So I'm going to keep hitting unicorns, and you're kind of you're like the straight man in the scene. So you're like, oh yeah, sure, buddy, that sounds great, you know, but I'd rather just put it underneath the plane and make sure it goes with me on my trip. But thanks. Hey, here's $2. I appreciate your time. Oh, this is great. This is great. I don't know if you know this, but they have unicorn cons just like they have Comic Cons where everybody comes dressed as unicorns. It's kind of cool. You should do it sometime.
Is that so?
Great. Yeah, is that so? Now, what's really fun is you're never going to convince me that unicorns aren't cool, and I'm never going to be able to convince you that they are cool, but you're going to, in the scene, you're going to play along with me. So you might say, that's really interesting. You know, like I'm not into unicorns, but I've read a lot of books about the Loch Ness monster. And then my reply, and all you're doing is setting me up so I can play more unicorn stuff. Okay. So I might say like, excuse me, the Loch Ness monster is not real, but unicorns are. Okay, dude. And you're like, whoa, okay. So I'm just gonna fully explore unicorns the entire time. Now, there's a lot of things that I've done in this little made-up scene that have made my job a little harder. For one, we don't know each other. So it's always easier to play a scene when we're like best friends. Because I don't know about you, but do you have friends in your life that are kind of weird, and they're weird for a specific reason? Like
I am that friend, my friend.
Great. So I'm sure. So like with me, everyone's like, oh yeah, Brian, he's always talking about comedy and everything. And for you, it might be like, oh yeah, Mikey's got that podcast, blah, blah, blah. So like if we're in a comedy scene and we know each other, we aren't going to have any contention. It's going to be us playing together because I know you like unicorns and you know I like comedy. And so we can keep building on that idea. If that makes any sense. So yeah. So the classes are like learning how to, one, find a character or an unusual situation, telling your scene partner what you think you can play, having both people learn how to support that idea in the right way and how to get it to its conclusion and be funny. And so, like I said, we fail along the way, but when you're first starting, it's like, here's your success rate and here's your fail rate. But over time, those things start to, kind of reverse themselves. Yeah. And so it's just a matter of doing it. But there's a lot of skills involved of like playing a character, playing pattern, taking it to crazy town, knowing when to keep your mouth shut, like listening to somebody, like really listening to somebody instead of like thinking ahead of what they're trying to do, is like being in the moment and both of you guys working on an idea. I had an instructor that said, the two of you are going to build skyscrapers together, not track housing. And I was like, oh, that's very good. Like we're going to keep building on this one idea rather than having all these weird ideas. So like every scene will have a focus, and this focus was unicorns.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah. That's awesome. Yeah. And also really cool. I can see how all those things that you were rattling off around those skills that you build there, I could also see just how that would apply in so many completely unexpected places in the rest of your life, in your job, and your relationships and whatever. I probably got to get into a class at some point. You got to do an improv class. I got to try.
But it's so true. Like just, like the two things that I really take away that I think are applicable to a lot of businesses and relationships is like the best way to make yourself look good. This is an improv rule. The best way to make yourself look good is make somebody else look good. So like, I'm going to set you up and support you to be successful. And I think a lot of times when we're in business situations, there's always this rivalry. Like I want to be on top, like I want to be the person who gets the promotion. But I think a lot of times if we just support people and give them mentorship, they become better in that position, right? And because they do well, I'm lifting up everybody in this business. The other thing I think is really applicable to life and business is this ability to like really listen to people. I always tell people that in scenes, your scene partner is going to say the thing that you're going to do next. So in other words, instead of me just superficially, or how I describe it as like boyfriend or girlfriend listening to your scene partner, like you're going to really, really listen to your scene partner. So they're going to say something, and that's going to be the next thing that's going to happen in the scene. So just really attentive listening. I think in life, I don't know about you, but when some people start to talk sometimes, I start anticipating what they're going to say. So I'm not really listening to them anymore. I'm trying to guess what the end of this conversation is going to be like so I can jump in and start saying something. But
that is so egocentric. I mean, who are you?
But I think everybody has those moments where they're like, yeah, and then they want to say it. Yeah. So totally. I think, but if we're like really attentive and really listening, we start to hear the things that they really want us to know. And it's usually behind a bush someplace. People a lot of times don't lead with what is going on. They work up to it. So we have to we can't just listen to the beginning of the conversation. We have to be attentive the entire time. And then we can start building and having a real conversation. And I just don't think as people, we do that a lot, but on stage, it's the perfect situation. Like if I'm in an improv scene, if I really listen, I'm going to come up with that next thing because they just gave me the idea.
Yeah, that's cool. That's so cool. I love that. Well, this has been super fun. I'm so glad we had a chance to have this conversation. Before I let you go, where is the best place to direct people to what you're all about?
Yeah, so go to our website. It's a Comedy Spot website, saccomedyspot.com. We're on social media, most social media at Sac Comedy Spot. So, Twitter at Sac Comedy Spot. So you can go there, check us out. Any one of our social medias. We do a lot of live streaming shows on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch. So find us there. So if you're not in Sacramento, you can still watch some of our shows that we do online. And if you become a supporter of the Comedy Spot, like Patreon or a Facebook subscriber, we give you a free show, a free live show that we do live streaming every single Saturday night at 9 o'clock, and that's our flagship show, Anti-Cooperation League. So if you become a supporter, you get a link where you can watch those shows every Saturday night at 9 p.m. for free, and that anywhere in the country. So those are all the places you can find us, and if you want to get involved, that's the best way to start.
That's fantastic. All right. Well, thank you. I will include all that info in the show notes for people so they can find it real easy. I appreciate all the time that you spent with me. This was so fun. And hey, if I'm ever in Sacramento, you're going to have to squeeze me into one of the classes.
Definitely. We will definitely do that.
All right. Well, thanks, man. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Got a cool story to share? Hit me up at mikecav.com. That's MIKEKAV.com. Don't forget to give this a like, review on Apple Podcasts, and share it with people. It makes a huge impact and helps keep it going. But above all else, lead your movement.